She turned to the young officer. "What's your name?" "Officer Tate, ma'am." He stood straight, clearly nervous. I didn't know this happened until I walked in." She nodded. "You've done nothing wrong." Her voice was steady, but her mind was already working through what would happen next. There was no need to call her son. He would find out soon enough. The moment those videos hit social media, there would be no stopping the storm that was coming. Back inside, Bradley took a deep breath, glancing around the cafe. The barista avoided his eyes. A couple near the counter whispered to each other. He reached for his coffee, but his hand shook. He cursed under his breath and set it back down. His radio crackled. A call from dispatch. Routine. He didn't answer. His gut told him he had bigger problems now. And he was right, because at that very moment, the chief of police was just minutes away from seeing the first video. And when he did, Officer Bradley's career, and maybe his entire life, would never be the same again. Bradley's hands were sweating now. He could feel the weight of every stare in the cafe, the quiet judgment settling on him like a heavy blanket. He wanted to walk out, act like nothing had happened, but his feet wouldn't move. His mind kept circling back to the way that young officer had looked at the woman, the fear, the urgency. It was more than just concern, it was respect. And if a rookie like him knew exactly who she was, then Bradley had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Outside, the woman stood near the curb, her phone in her hand but untouched. She wasn't in a rush. There was no need. These things had a way of unraveling on their own. She had lived in this city long enough to understand how quickly power could shift, how men like Bradley built their entire worlds on authority they didn't deserve, and how, in a single moment, it could all come crushing down. Officer Tate shifted beside her, clearly on edge. "Ma'am, if there's anything I can do." She gave him a small, knowing smile. "You've already done enough." Across town, inside a sleek office lined with plaques and awards, a phone buzzed. The chief of police glanced down at his screen, his face unreadable. A message, a video link, a subject line that made his stomach tighten. **** your mother. Officer Bradley, downtown cafe. ***. He clicked it. The screen filled with the shaky recording. The cafe, the customers, the moment of impact. The hot coffee hitting his mother's face. The way she stood there, silent and still, while the man responsible turned his back like nothing had happened. A slow breath left his lungs, controlled but heavy. His fingers curled into a fist on his desk. He had barely been in office a month, barely settled into the impossible weight of leading this city's department. And now, on his screen, was proof that one of his own had made a reckless, career-ending decision. He reached for his radio. Back at the cafe, Bradley's radio crackled again. This time, a sharp voice cut through the static. "Officer Bradley, report to headquarters." Immediately, his stomach dropped. This was it, the moment everything came crashing down. Bradley's throat went dry. The radio call had been brief, but the weight behind it was crushing. His instincts screamed at him to do something. Denny, deflect, find a way out. But there was no way out, not this time. The cafe felt smaller now, the walls closing in as he moved toward the door. His steps were stiff, unnatural. He could feel the eyes on him, watching, waiting. Some of them still had their phones up. He gritted his teeth. If this went viral, when this went viral, his name would be everywhere. Outside, Officer Tate stood rigid, his face tight with something Bradley couldn't quite place. Not fear, not anger, something worse. Pity. The woman was still there, calm as ever. She hadn't spoken to him, hadn't acknowledged him beyond that one chilling stare. That silence was worse than any words she could have said. Bradley swallowed hard and turned away, heading toward his patrol car. He needed time to think. He needed a plan. But before he could reach the door handle, a second voice cut through the tense air. "Bradley." It wasn't the radio this time. It was real. It was close. And when he turned around, his heart nearly stopped. Standing on the sidewalk, a few feet away, was Chief Harris. He wasn't at headquarters. He wasn't behind a desk. He was here, in person. And worse, he wasn't alone. Two internal affairs officers stood at his sides, their expressions unreadable. The chief's face was like stone, his gaze locked onto Bradley with an intensity that made the air feel thick. Collins stiffened, his head snapping toward the disappearing vehicle. His reaction wasn't frustration, it was fear. And in that moment, Lisa knew. Whatever was happening tonight, whatever Collins had planned, he wasn't acting alone. But now, something had spooked his accomplice. Lisa seized the moment. "Looks like your friend had second thoughts," she said, watching Collins carefully. "Maybe you should too." For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. His hand hovered over his radio, torn between following through on whatever had been planned and reassessing the situation. Her son, silent until now, leaned in just enough to whisper, "Mom, I think I saw someone in that car." Lisa's pulse raced. Someone had been watching them from the other vehicle. But why would they abandon Collins now? Then it hit her. There was more to this than a traffic stop, more than intimidation. This was bigger than one racist cop trying to make a statement. Someone had been orchestrating this from behind the scenes. And now, for some reason, they were pulling out. Collins's radio crackled again, but this time it was different. A new voice. A sharp, commanding tone. "Stand down." Lisa felt the shift immediately. Collins's face paled. The game had changed. But who had just changed the rules? And why? Collins froze. His radio crackled again, the voice sharper this time. "I said stand down." Lisa watched the shift in his face. Anger, confusion, then something closer to fear. Whoever had just given that order outtranked him. And judging by his reaction, this wasn't the way things were supposed to go. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, with a clenched jaw, he took a step back from the car. Lisa kept her hands steady on the wheel, but inside, her mind was racing. Her son leaned in again, voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I think I know who was in that other car." Lisa turned to him, her heartbeat thunderous. "Who?" His eyes darted to Collins, then back to her. "That guy from the hearing last week, the one you called out." Lisa's stomach dropped. The ethics hearing, the one that had exposed deep corruption in local law enforcement. She had been the one to push for it, to bring certain names into the light. And one of those names belonged to a high-ranking official, someone who had a lot to lose if she kept digging. Lisa turned back to Collins, who was gripping his radio, face tense. He wasn't just some rogue cop trying to intimidate her. He was the pawn, and the person pulling the strings had just abandoned him. She exhaled slowly, keeping her voice controlled. "You were sent here, weren't you?" Collins's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but the flicker in his expression was all the confirmation she needed. Then suddenly, the distant roar of an engine filled the air. Another car. But this time, it wasn't a police vehicle. It was coming fast, headlights blinding. Lisa reacted on instinct. "Hold on." Before Collins could even register what was happening, Lisa hit the gas. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, just as the oncoming vehicle skidded into the spot where they had been. A black SUV, windows tinted, no plates. Lisa didn't need to see who was inside to know the truth. Someone had sent Collins to scare her. And when that failed, they sent someone else to silence her. But now they had made a mistake. They had shown their hand. And Lisa Carter wasn't done fighting. Lisa's hands were steady on the wheel, but her heart pounded as she sped down the empty road. The SUV's headlights shrank in the rearview mirror, but she knew this wasn't over. Someone had sent that car, and they wouldn't give up that easily. Her son sat frozen beside her, eyes darting between the mirror and the road ahead. "Mom, what just happened?" Lisa exhaled, trying to keep her voice calm. "We just saw the truth in action." Collins had been part of something bigger. He had been sent to intimidate her, maybe more. But when his backup fled, It became clear that whoever was behind this had realized they had made a mistake. They hadn't expected her to put the pieces together so quickly, and they certainly hadn't expected her to get away. She reached for her phone, hitting a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Lisa, it's late. I need you to pull some files. Now." A pause. Then, what kind of files? Lisa's eyes flicked to the mirror. No sign of the SUV, the ones we weren't supposed to find. Her contact understood it immediately. "Got it. Sending what I can." She hung up and tightened her grip on the wheel. She had been fighting corruption for years, exposing those who abused their power. But tonight had proved something dangerous. Whoever she was up against was willing to cross lines they couldn't take back. Her son exhaled shakily. "Are we safe?" Lisa glanced at him, her heart twisting. For now. But she knew the fight wasn't over. This wasn't just about one cop, one stop. This was about a system built to silence people like her, but they had underestimated her. Lisa Carter had spent her entire life fighting for justice, and tonight they had just given her another reason to keep going.